Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new EU Disinfo Labs webinar. Wherever you are joining from, glad that you are here. Today's session is called From Botnets to AI Swarms, Tracking Emerging Risks Through an AI Influence Observatory, and we have a lot to discuss. My name is Raquel Miguel. I'm a senior researcher at EU Disinfo Lab. For those who don't know us, we are a nonprofit organization focused on disinformation in Europe, building knowledge, supporting the people working in the field, and creating spaces like this one to share what we are learning from our community, from you. And today we are joined by Daniel Tilo Schroeder. Daniel, really glad to have you here. Thank you for making the time. But before we dive in, a quick heads up. Our annual conference is coming up. This year will be in Vilnius from October 6th to the 8th. Those who haven't done it yet, mark your calendars and register as soon as possible, because this year we will have a bunch of renowned speakers. Just to name a few: Peter Pomerantsev, Christo Bushek, Kalina Voncheva, or Alexios Mantharlis. We have published a preview of our fantastic lineup today, which you can already explore on our website. And as we prepare for the conference, we'd love your help. And we are counting on this community to spread the word. As always, we prioritize independence, integrity, and accessibility, and that's why we offer complimentary tickets to selected speakers from academia, research institutions, journalism, and civil society. If you or your organization shares our mission and it's in a position to support us financially, or if you know someone who could be interested, please do reach out. All right, a few more quick reminders before we kick off. As usual, we are recording today's session. You will find this webinar and all previous ones on our YouTube channel. If you want to follow along in another language, you can turn on live captions and switch to your preferred language. The instructions are on your screen right now. And very important for the Q&A, we are using Slido. Please scan the QR code on the screen or go to slido.com and enter hashtag disinfo to join. As our regular attendees know, we will be taking questions after the presentation, but let's warm up Slido right now. We would appreciate if you could connect and let us know where are you joining from and what sector you work in. Go ahead and type it in. Vilnius, Madrid, fantastic. Don't wait until the end to send your questions. By the way, drop them in any time during the presentation, and please steer away from the Zoom chat. Messages there can easily get missed. Okay, love to see some responses come in. Keep it up. Brussels, Rome, Madrid, Leipzig, Germany, Helsinki, Vilnius, Dublin. Diplomacy. We will go there in the next phase. Erfurt, more from Germany. Let's see what happens with the professional sectors. And quick reminder for anyone just joining, slido.com hashtag disinfo. That's where the Q&A happens. And we want to make sure you know how it works before we start. Okay, a big majority from NGOs, civil society, but also people from academia, business, media, international organizations. Okay, percentage changing a bit. That's fantastic. This is exactly the kind of room we want for this conversation. Really glad to have such a diverse crowd with us today. And thank you for your patience. Now, let's get into it. From botnets to AI swarms, tracking emerging risks through an AI Influence Observatory with Daniel Tilo Schroeder. Daniel is a researcher at Sintef Digital, working at the intersections of AI, democracy, and information integrity. His focus right now is on what he calls malicious AI swarms. You may have noticed the title has two parts. The first one is about the risks. We have been watching AI moving fast from chatbots to AI agents. And Daniel saw it coming. He has been wondering what happens when you combine LLM reasoning with multi-agents architecture, systems that don't just generate content, but coordinate, infiltrate, and manufacture the illusion of consensus at scale. And he's also looking at how this can impact democracies. And that is why the second part is about solutions. Daniel is putting forward a concrete proposal today, the creation of an AI Influence Observatory, an institution capable of matching the speed, scale, and flexibility and adaptability of AI threats. In large part, his work should be taken as a warning, but also as a window of opportunity. We still have a chance to get ahead of the next generations of AI-enabled influence operations, right, Daniel? And to help us understand more about this threat and advancing solutions, I give you the floor. Welcome again, and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was very nice introduction, Raquel. So let me quickly share my screen. It takes a second. Okay, that should be okay now. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. A very nice introduction. A couple of words before maybe. So what I would like to do with this talk is actually suggest such an observatory. At the same time, I do not know a lot about that, right? So this session should be very much a session in which we all come together and kind of like brainstorm and exchange ideas. And I want to make that clear. So we are very preliminary, but I think it's a time now to actually discuss and bring these ideas forward, and this is what this talk is actually for. So what I'm going to do is I will give a little bit of an introduction on what I was working on before, and as you said, present a couple of solutions, and then have a couple of slides about how I would envision such a observatory, very preliminary. Okay, so the talk is called From Botnets to AI Swarms, Tracking Emerging Risks through an AI Observatory. And this is all based on this science paper we had in the beginning of the year. And for all you who do not like science, it's a very prestigious journal for research. And there's a special section in this journal called the Science Policy Forum. And this is very much the place where experts come together and suggest new research or policy agendas, right? And I think it's important to mention that here is because all the things I'm going to talk about today are partly not happening, but to be expected, right? So technology is there, and it's based on the assessment of experts that warn, and we would like to be prepared and suggest like new research, new policy agendas. And as part will this talk will partly was partly based on this How Malicious AI Swarms Can Threaten Democracy paper, and I will come to that later, and partly based on a paper we recently published as a preprint, a Puppets or Partner Governing Cyborg Propaganda in the Digital Public Sphere. And this is very much about the idea that agents become more and more hybrid, but I will come back to that later. So how does the moth navigate? It uses the moon as a reference. And this has evolved for millions of years because the moon has always been there. The problem is simply that moths during these millions of years of evolution have never encountered artificial light. And because artificial light is closer than the moon, the moths tend to crash into light. So moths depend on the moon and the moon alone. And artificial light misleads a lot of animals. But what about humans? We certainly do not crash into streetlights. But maybe artificial intelligence misleads us in the same way artificial light is misleading so many animals. The problem with artificial intelligence is that it feels like human, but it's so much more. Artificial intelligence can do to humans what artificial light can do to the mouse. So like I research disinformation, and my research, I try to understand how AI can mislead thousands of people, and that at scale. You all probably remember this 2016 election and the Russian interference during these elections. When I started my PhD in 2019, I had a chance to look into the data of these campaigns. And they mostly came from troll farms and botnets. So troll farms are practically human-backed, and botnets already back then were kind of like automated. And one thing stood out when looking into the data of these bot farms in particular. So content was rather simple, was always the same messages, kind of like in-your-face messages, something like vote for Trump, was very repetitive. There was no engagement or very little, and when there was engagement, like comments, they were partly off. And in general, it was just like not very human-like. So I remember seeing accounts that have tweeted thousands of times a day, or like for 24/7, like every day, even at night, right? And looking into the content of these troll farms, that was already a lot more sophisticated, obviously, because there were actually humans behind these accounts. So it was much more sophisticated. People could actually comment, more engaging. But that would simply not scale, correct? So you can only have so and so many humans, right? How many are working at such a troll farm? 200, 300, maybe 400. How many accounts can they play or drive? Like maybe 10 each, something like this. So these operations were very targeted, for example, like targeted in space and time. So for example, for elections, and they could only target a couple of number of people. These could be hand selected, but at the end, they would, like these operations simply would not scale. And just in general, the research, and there's a whole body of research about that, has shown that these campaigns were just not very successful. So they did not reach a lot of people, and they could convince even less. And I know that there's some people that say that that might not have been the reason for these campaigns, because maybe it was to polarize or to actually distract, right? But at the end of the day, not a lot of people were reached. And you could conclude that this was not very, very successful. And we think all of that has obviously changed with AI, and in particular, the latest frontier in AI technologies, these large language models and agentic AI. So they are cheap. Inference is kind of like cheap. You can produce tailored and hand-tailored messages at scale. Now you can answer comments correctly. You can have extended conversations over multiple conversation rounds. These systems pass Turing tests, in particular in online social networks. So Turing tests are this: we put a human in front of such a system, and the human can't really distinguish between a computer and another human anymore. I can develop strategies. And this is very important. They are very convincing, right? While these systems are not very good with reasoning because they're just trained on like huge amounts of data and imitate, so to speak. They're in particular good with language, and they're very, very convincing. And there is a lot of research from 2024 on that has shown that. So these models can talk people out of conspiracy theories, can talk people into conspiracy theories, in particular over several discussion rounds, because they can add on arguments, um, but could also change beliefs that are somehow deeper integrated into your belief system, like political attitudes. And they can do all of that at scale. And we see that already happening with cyborg propaganda, where humans are potentially used as meat puppets to post tailored messages in online social networks. Um, so in like right after we published the science paper, we got contacted by a couple of colleagues from the Canadian National Observer. That's an magazine for like with investigative journalism stories up there in Canada. And they were working on a story about what we later called cyborg propaganda. Like it's practically this idea, or it's actually happening right now. But in election campaigns, there are providers of applications, like cell phone applications now, that offer their services to these campaigns, and campaigns would buy them. Um, and they would ask, like the campaigns would ask their followers to download these applications. And while they download them, simultaneously, by the download and install them on their phones, they would simultaneously upload information about their contacts, right? So like from your contact book, but maybe also from other apps. And in the background, in the back end of these applications, this data would be correlated with data online. So these app providers are actually capable of modeling particular social environments, local social environments. They know who your mother is, who your brother is, things like that, and can correlate that with data online. Um, and what they do then is they would send you notifications um, and asking you to actually post content in your online social networks, like on Facebook or Twitter or any other social network that is actually hand-tailored for this particular local social environment. And when you do that, after a while, this information could be used again, right? You can read the comments and feedback in order to improve campaign strategies. So you have this kind of like cycle. And what that very much does, it's somehow blurring the border in between what a human is and what an automated bot is, right? In particular, I don't know, when you look into LinkedIn right now, I would say that probably most of the posts there are in one way or the other AI generated, like mostly by humans probably, but most people use these systems in order to polish language, um, avoid typos, things like that, right? And while systems become much more advanced and sophisticated, people would actually pay less and less attention to what the AI is generated. And this is called cognitive offloading, right? Um, and this will be less and less, in particular with all these emerging assistants right now, right? That can automatically feed your online social networks. So my point here is you can't really say there's not this binary distinction in between a bot and a human anymore with these type of systems. So the border between AI and human blurs, and this is risky in particular because of this cognitive offloading. You can't differentiate anymore. But also people lack the ability to build their political opinions when they are not really involved in what they're writing anymore. right? And all of that is happening right now. So the guys from the Canadian National Observer reported that, I think I have to look that up, but I think it was in the last Israel election and the last Georgian election, and one more. The systems were already in use, and that was by the beginning of the year. But what happens if you can completely autonomize these propaganda campaigns? And this is pretty much the next generation and these malicious AI swarms we have looked into. So while cyber propaganda is already happening, we are currently investing this next generation. And the key shift is not only AI generated content, it is increasingly, and that's an important point and what was really new in our paper also, AI systems that coordinate themselves. So imagine you're an online social network, let's say in Facebook or in Twitter, and you're somehow surrounded by all these malicious accounts. And as I said before, they're indistinguishable now, right? So they can really be there over extended periods of time. They can really look like humans and they can actually react like humans. And they may even in parts be these cyber propaganda accounts or accounts that are in part humans. And let's say you are part of two communities in these online social networks, like a motorcycle community and a basketball community, for example. Um, and like suddenly, or not only suddenly, but over extended periods of time, and this is really new, right? Like remember in these Russian influence campaigns from 2016, you would have rather like simple content or content that is very, very targeted to specific groups or during elections. And now you can have that over extended periods of time. And this really allows for like a whole spectrum of new strategies, namely those in which you prepare this human substrate in a way that you can implement ideas faster, right? So you could polarize over extended periods of times. You can actually confuse doing these type of things. And you can do that from different directions. And this is very important, right? So you would not always talk to one bot, but because these bots are actually capable of communicating in the background and communicating secretly in the background and developing kind of strategies, they can work on you from several different directions. So there is a guy in the basketball community that talks to you while a guy in the motorcycle community talks to you and try to convince you about a particular thing. But you are not even remotely aware that these people are talking to each other. And like this is one of the main problems there. And this is very important also for the observatory idea I would like to pitch later. This does not only happen on one platform anymore. So we must assume, and in part it's already like this, that these malicious agents are actually maintaining a set of different accounts, right? So they can probably answer emails, and all of that is totally possible with today's agents technologies. So they probably have a Twitter account, like an X account, a Facebook account, and would actually look like real humans, or more and more like real humans. Yeah, I think that's the most important concepts of these AI swarms. So while cyber propaganda is already happening, we are currently investigating the next generation, yeah, and so the next generation of completely automated disinformation campaigns. And what I've shown you right now is like a little bit of a, let's say, a short time history of influence in the digital age, beginning mostly with this 2016 elections. But what's important to mention here is that like this on the right side, in particular cyber propaganda and malicious AI swarms, is really a new infrastructure of influence. And it's mostly because it actually scales and it's so indistinguishable anymore, right? In all dimensions. So you can't really differentiate humans from bots anymore. You can scale and they can be coordinated. So the core conceptual point of this talk, or at least this part of the talk, is that one trend autonomizes the human and the other is actually humanizing the machine. But together they converge on exactly the same security vulnerability. They fundamentally destabilize the boundary between organic and engineered behavior, making more and more difficult for our institutions to safely extract public signals. And all of that obviously has consequences. And I think by far the most important consequence to mention here is probably loss of trust. So when you do not really know to whom you are talking, right? If it's a bot or not a bot or something in between, you simply lose trust in your social environments, right? You may just trust people you're meeting in the physical world, and maybe not even that, because they might be influenced by these systems as well, right? So erosion of trust is what I would assume the like most important point to mention as a consequence. But also things like erosion of the epistemic substrate. So these systems somehow pollute what will be trained into the next generation of, let's say, large language models, right? They could even do that, and this is something we could imagine systematically. So there are already these campaigns of, I think it's LLM poisoning, in which bots create like a multitude of websites that that's only purpose is to actually be fed into the next generation of large language models. But you also could imagine that, for example, in crisis communication, particular institutions could be just like denied of service attacked, right? So like it's just a sheer amount of data that would confuse people. So there's like a lot of consequences. But erosion of trust is probably the most important to mention here. And this is pretty much like a personal point I would like to make here, or like a so while there's a lot of research or like a lot of money that is actually invested in AI research in general, there's very little money that is invested in AI research, and AI risk research is what I wanted to say, sorry. And this is probably something we should change and we should work on and be at least aware of. There are these Jeffrey Hinton papers from, I think this Benji and Hinton paper from 2024, like the extreme risk of AI. And that also mentions that, right? So that we need more money for AI risk research. This is just like a general statement before I come to countermeasures. And we do not have a lot of time, right? There's more we can do, and I described these things in my paper quite extensively. But the most important things to mention as counters for these developments is first and foremost access to data from social network or data access in general. So I remember doing my PhD working with systems that would download billions of tweets actually in order to investigate how phenomena we called digital wildfires back then, so conspiracy theories with real world consequences, would disseminate in online social networks. And all of that is just not possible anymore because all the public APIs of these platforms actually closed, right? So like when Elon Musk took over Twitter, or the last API was kind of closed. I mean, you get a little bit of Blue Sky and Mastodon, these open source networks. But in general, it is very, very difficult to look into data at scale. And this is super important, right? Especially when you want to investigate phenomena that probably happen at scale. The second pillar is understanding this swarm behavior. And this also different now, right? While there were coordinated campaigns, probably for a long time, human coordinated campaigns, these new campaigns, are they at scale, right? So like that's super important. But previous detection also mostly targeted kind of like content or behavior of individual bots, right? Things like I've explained before with these Russian bots that would tweet thousands of times a day, right? So that's a behavior of a particular individual bot. So all these things do not really work anymore to detect bots. We actually have to understand the collective behavior and the strategies that emerge from these large-scale AI-backed automated influence systems. And we can only do that with, first of all, data access, but also with red teaming and simulations that would allow us first and foremost to understand what type of strategies develop, right? But also to actually understand how they manifest and how they influence and like whom they would influence. And like as a last pillar, and again, this is just like a summary of the things we suggest, are these AI shields. Practically the idea that more and more of these AI systems become assistant-like. And you can see that in your ChatGPT session, for example, right? So there's kind of like a session above all sessions, something that stores who your name, what your name is, what was the last email you wrote, right? So there's kind of like some context that is maintained beyond an individual session and fed into every new session, right? And that in combination with these assistant systems that have access to your emails, to your social networks, to your calendar now, right? Builds this new assistant. And the responsibility of these assistants should somehow be to use this context they maintain, this kind of like virtual model of you, in order to prevent and shield you against things that are happening outside, right? When like the assistant is practically your interface to the outside world, it's its responsibility to process information in a way that they are digestible for you, but also maybe take over when it comes to countermeasures or counter statements. Yeah. And like this is the last 3 minutes of my presentation, and this is really about this AI influence observatory idea. Practically, the idea is that we somehow need some, and this should be first and foremost, right? And I really would like to have that as part of the discussion, but some communication infrastructure that allows us to tackle these new threats and to react fast. So we have these multi-platform campaigns, right? They are long running now. We have these sophisticated strategies. There's almost no access to data anymore. We have these hybrid actors, right? Like human AI assisted things. And this can only be approached when we are actually kind of like working together. And I think, and this is just a preliminary suggestion, right? But we somehow need to have kind of like platform and infrastructure in particular um, to work with this multi-platform threats. There need to be researchers that have access to data, that understand these threats and develop new detections and countermeasurements. Civil society and in particular policymakers need to be informed fast, right? And last but not least, journalists. We need to spread countermeasures fast, right? Like all these needs to be institutionalized. And I'm almost done with my 30 minutes, right? But the question is, like, do we need a new institution that establishes that? Or is there any kind of previous institutions we can just upgrade and update? And that should be also part of the discussion, Raquel, in order to face these new attack surfaces. Yeah, I'm like 30 minutes in now, exactly. And this is a slide for the resources. So I put the papers there as well as the presentation. And I would like to thank you all. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for your fantastic presentation. And now it's Q&A time. We have around 15, 20 minutes. So let's make this time count. Head to Slido, QR code on the screen, or slido.com #disinfo. Questions are already coming in. So if you see one you care about, vote it up. That helps us to prioritize. I'm going to use my moderator privilege and go first. Because you finalize your presentation with a remark on something I wanted to ask you, Daniel. We have people in this room working in research, civil society, policy making, and they know or they are even part of already existing structures to counter AI threats. Some examples come to mind. We have the AI for Media Observatory, and there is also a dedicated AI working group in the EDMO, the European Digital Media Observatory. So my question to you was related exactly with your last reflection. So how do existing institutions fit into what you are proposing today? I mean, how do you envision this cooperation, if any?
And like this is, I think there's like a very comprehensive landscapes like already, right? And like so I would like to give this question back because I really don't know, and I think we should discuss that to today, right? So the point is that we that we really need this communication infrastructure, because these threats are just not like one-dimensional anymore, right? So it's no transitive threats. They are multidimensional, and that can only be caught up when we all work together, right? And I would like just to discuss it here if possible.
Okay, so please, the members of our audience who would like to send a comment in Slido, please.
So please, sorry for interrupting. Please just contact me, right? And like we can have a meeting and then discuss it further. Yeah.
Yes, there are a couple of questions in the chat related to the idea of the observatory. One of them is in terms of resources, very important question. What would it take to make this proposal real? And probably who do you think, Daniel, should be the main funders of such a structure?
So like this is why I came to you guys as like the very first station, right? To discuss this on the NGO level. I think this should not be bound to some platform or like capitalistic institution, somebody who would like to make profit, right? It needs to be global somehow. And I also at this point like do not really know. I could envision that there is platform money, because these like, platform providers have to participate, right? Could envision that there are research budgets for that, in particular when it comes to develop new detection mechanisms and understanding these campaigns, right? But like, very happy to discuss more and to understand more how you could finance something, right? Like my important point was to present that need, right?
There is another question related with the governance of this observatory, but I guess you will have the same comment on this. Maybe just open the floor, even offline, to continue the conversation after this webinar. And unless you want to add something else about the observatory, there are plenty of questions related with the first part of the presentation. If
Yes,
that's fine with you, we can go.
yes, we can go through that.
Okay, great. One of them is asking, please, could you tell us more about persistent AI personas? Like, do they have a long-term digital identity, or do they build a story behind them?
So like we assume that they will start to build stories behind them, and like there was not that much space in this 30-minute talk, and I try to keep it as simple as possible. But we are currently working on this red teaming simulations, in particular in first of all one platform environments, but then also multi-platform environments, and we already see these things happening, right? So these simulations are practically subdivided in simulation steps, and there are reflection steps in which the agents are allowed to think for themselves and to reflect, and they really build background stories, right? And really build up a background context that would feed into, first of all, this one platform, but later into multiple platforms as well. So we must assume that.
Okay, thank you. There is a very, very interesting question following. How much human oversight do AI swarms actually need once deployed? And at what point does a swarm become entirely autonomous?
Yes, and this is a very good question. One thing I also didn't have in my talk is that we are currently working on an operational definition, right? And when you work on these type of things, you would first of all try to find the dimension of the problem space, right? And one of them is definitely autonomy. So in our current red teaming simulations, we have more of like a hierarchical setup. And this is naturally where you would like to start, right? So something like maybe a campaign manager node, and we call them AI operators, or operators that are somehow distributed in the online social network. That would kind of like translate a higher level strategy to local social environments, right? A little bit similar to the cyborg propaganda operations I've described before. That would be very hierarchical. Right. But then you could obviously play around with election mechanisms, consent mechanisms, things like that towards a more autonomous direction. And this is what we predict, right? We predict these systems become more and more autonomous. Our current simulations can't really reflect fully autonomous swarms yet.
Okay, this is you are already responding a bit the next one, which is how much of this is already happening and how much is the beginning of a trend, a bigger trend.
Yes, and so I had the cyber propaganda example, and this is entirely happening, right? So you can read up these stories, and then in larger platforms, they usually maintain teams for coordinated disinformation, right? Like these things in general are not new. It's just a question to which degree this is actually done by AI now, right? And the problem is that this is very multidimensional because there might be human coordinated campaigns that are just more and more AI assisted up to a degree where they completely run autonomous. And the degree to which that is happening is very, very difficult to predict and to actually see, right? Also because we do not have this platform data. But I'm entirely sure that there are already autonomous systems out there, at least on smaller scales. A colleague of mine, Lucas, and I can put the paper into the slide resources as well, has shown last year already, I guess it was mid 2025 or something when the preprint came out, that he could run entirely autonomous campaigns. And this was his research question here from his bedroom, so to speak, with very, very small open source large language models. And that's also a dimension I haven't shown in my talk. These things tend to be relatively easy, right? So like the first prototype for our red teaming simulations didn't take long in particular, or especially with today's coding tools, right?
One of our attendees says he joined later. Have you explained how AI swarms compromise, infiltrate, or co-opt verified human profiles without triggering the platform security alerts? I think you covered that partially, maybe not fully. So I don't know if you want to add something on that, or maybe focusing a bit more on the fails of the platform security alerts precisely.
Yeah, a good question is like how sophisticated these alerts are in the first place, I would say, right? But then, and that's also something I did not have time in my talk for, right? Like strategies can entirely be A/B tested, right? So you could use new accounts or just like bot accounts in order to test whether things work, right? And not only the response of particular communities or parts of the human civilization body, so to speak, but also totally for platform systems, right? So you can try out when alarms are triggered, when you get warnings, right? And just like adjust your strategies accordingly. I think this is not a very, very large problem. And just like from my personal experience, it takes a while until these alarms are triggered, right? In particular, because these platforms are also challenged by these assistance systems, right? So you do not really know when an actor behind such an agent is actually malicious, or when this is just my personal assistant that is writing my tweet, right?
That's closely related to the next question I had highlighted. What could be some useful markers for drawing the line between acceptable and unacceptable AI swarms? would marketing efforts be seen as more acceptable?
Yeah, I think in this my personal opinion that like marketing and these influence campaigns have a lot in common. So there's large intersect, right? And this is all part of the operational definition, and we are just not there yet, right? And when you have like just for the a person that asks these questions, when you have ideas and would like to contribute, please give me a call, and we can discuss that. So like this is a question we ask ourselves. So where is the border and where does it begin? They're probably hybrid systems. They're probably systems that are longer persistent, that would be partly malicious and partly not. There might be even positive swarms, right? Things like that, right?
And another follow-up question, could the same technology be turned around and used defensively? And if so, what would a responsible deployment look like, and what policy safeguards could we need?
Um, So this is also a question we ask ourselves. Is there something like positive or defense swarms, right? And how would they look like? Would they look similar, or would they maybe be more integrated into these platforms already, right? So might there be kind of like an agent per account type of things that is capable of like communicating meta information about like particular subjects or their hosts, so to speak, right? All that is also open research.
Yeah, maybe we can go. No, I wanted to highlight this question because I have heard it so many times recently, like the suggestion that we should use AI agents capacities for offensively countering disinformation. So this is another way we can think around about these technologies, right?
Do you have a position there, Raquel, in the EU Disinfo?
Um, we are always listening to the researchers in the field suggesting ideas on how to counter, and we are very cautious regarding the speaking about offensive approaches. But yeah, any technology developed with good purposes to to trigger the counter disinformation strategies is welcome on our side. There is, before wrapping up, another question I wanted to highlight. I think it's this one, is the direction of travel away from social platforms, partly because platforms are filling up with AIs, both malicious and benign, and also because people are now engaging more with individual relationships with LLM chatbots.
Yeah, I could imagine that this is the case. I do not have a particular study in mind, but and this is very much my personal opinion. I would think that like probably weak ties entirely collapse into AI assistants, and that communication is probably taken over by this type of systems, like long term. And but this is just a personal guess. This is really not. This has no foundation on that. Yeah.
Okay, another one is agent persuasion, misinformation swarm campaigns being considered, especially in the case where people offload some tasks to their agents and agentic capabilities are still in a developmental stage.
Yeah, it's the simple answer to that is yes. So this is part of our thinking here, right? And like again, right? It's very important for me that all the listeners understand that we are very early stage here, but this is also the purpose of this talk and this conversation here, right? So we want to be kind of like ahead of the actual developments. Yeah.
Okay, we have just two questions more. How secure from AI swarms is Social, which is made in EU and claims to let in only humans?
That I do not really know and can't answer honestly because I've not really looked into that too deeply yet.
Okay, that's fine. And maybe before we wrap up, I have a question related to your chart on AI investment. I think it was striking, like it highlights the extent to which AI-related risks appear to be under research. So I would like to know, what is your view, Daniel? Which areas should we prioritize in future research agendas on AI?
Um, I believe these cognitive offloading things are extremely important. And the idea that these assistants and systems in general have responsibility to kind of like ask and help in a way that the human in itself stays autonomous, right? And not dependent. I think there's a lot on the intersect of human psychology and AI. There's most likely a lot in defense and this disinformation, automated influence campaigns, right? Um, this is from my perspective, the two areas I would look into. Obviously, I work at Syntef. It's like very broad organization here. And like we do a lot of stuff. People working a lot of on defense, also like what technologies there is a whole forefront. But two things I've mentioned first are probably the most important from my perspective.
Okay, we have a last question, again related to the observatory. I don't know if you have heard about observatory platform that Macron is proposing. Is your idea similar or different to the AI observatory that France is suggesting?
This is a general AI observatory. It's like that. I think this is a broader idea than the one I'm proposing. Like mine would be mostly about these AI influence operations, right? And again, that doesn't really have to be an independent institution. Could be a branch of such a more general AI observatory, but we first and foremost need this the communication infrastructure, right? To have like fast, to be able to react fast, right? And also to counter fast. When you look into research about counter statement, for example, it turns out that a lot of the counter statements are actually not reaching the ones who started to believe in the falsehood. Things like that have to be improved.
Okay, there is one last minute question. Not sure this is your field of expertise, but from your point of view, what are the three major implications for children and young people when looking at the developments and threats you are describing?
It's correct, it's not my field, but I would guess that children are particularly vulnerable because they lack the capability to actually reflect, and that they would fall for these campaigns way faster, in particular when they are targeted, right? And this is also one thing I did not mention in my talk. These systems are not only very good with language and with convincing, but it turned out they're also relatively good with classification. In particular, when there is large amounts of social media data, they can extract psychological profiles and stuff like that, right? So for these systems, there is probably, and this is also just a guess, we do not have, I'm not aware of a paper about that. They can probably see if they're talking to a child or not, and might use attack vectors specific with as a particular vulnerable group.
Okay. Now, yes, we have run out of time. Daniel, thank you so much. This was an exciting conversation. You gave us a lot to think about. Even more, you brought us a concrete call to action, and we hope this webinar will contribute to making the observatory a reality. Any participant interested in getting involved, are more than welcome to contact Daniel and continue the conversation. Quick wrap up before we let you go. This session will be on our YouTube channel very soon. And please take 2 minutes to fill in the rating survey after you leave. And we have more webinars coming up before the summer break. Next week, we will have a new session from our series dedicated to evidence and enforcement with Michael Meyer Resende and Daniela Alvarado Rincon, speaking about what their organization, Democracy Reporting International, learned from suing X. And in 2 weeks from now, more on AI. Alex Colville, a researcher working at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, who will shed light on China's AI strategy and its impact on the global information space. Thank you again to our speaker, Daniel Schroeder, and also Anna and Heini, our support in the background. Thank you everyone for being here today. Have a nice day and see you next time.
Pleasure.